Good evening, everyone. My name is Mr. Swartz. The assignment that I have been tasked with was the social cognitive, self-concept, moral development, and the theory of moral development from Kohlberg. As I go through some of this information and those topics, I want to really dive into some other objectives that I have set aside for our learning today. And one of them is to really identify what is social cognitive theory. Another is I'm going to take a look into what is self-concept and why is that going to be important as a teacher in our classrooms. We're going to move on from there and actually take a look into Kohlberg's theory of moral development, and we're going to take a look into how it's structured and even look at some examples that he has from some of his work. And more specifically, we're going to really look into one of his most popular stories, his Heinz story, and take a look into that and to see really what your response is and what a child's response may be about the story to really determine kind of what level the student is on Kohlberg's theory of moral development. So I hope you enjoy, and we'll get started. All right, once again, my name is Mr. Swartz, and my topic today was the social cognitive, self-concept, moral development, and the theory of moral development from Kohlberg. So once again, to go back and recap some of our learning objectives, is we're going to take a look at what is the social cognitive theory. We're also going to take a look at what is self-concept. And we're going to need to even dive into this just a little bit further and figure out why is this important in our classrooms. We're going to take at Kohlberg's theory of moral development and find out what that is and how exactly it's structured. We'll even take a look at a couple examples along the way. So first off, I'd like to start taking a look into the social cognitive. Now, social cognition attempts to understand and explain how feelings, thoughts, and behaviors of an individual are influenced by the actual, imagined, or sometimes even implied presence of others. Social cognition has been applied to the study of the learning process. A major implication of the social cognition perspective is that for teachers to be effective and for their teaching to be effective, that the social cognition must be grounded and the teaching must be grounded in the appropriate level of social environment and in the appropriate social environment. So as we continue to look in the social cognitive, many researchers have actually investigated social cognition, and some have even changed from their own school of thought to this perspective. One of the most important concepts developed on social cognition was by the Canadian-American Albert Bandura. From his perspective, a person's behavior is both influenced by and is influencing a person's personal factors and the environment. Bandura accepts the possibility of an individual's behavior being conditioned through the use of consequences. Later on, we're going to see this same exact type of idea with Kohlberg. Now, at the same time, he also realizes that a person's behavior can impact the environment. The same is true between the personal factors such as cognitive skills or attitudes and behavior or the environment. Each can impact and be impacted by one another. So the behavior, once again, can be affected by personal factors and the environment, and also personal factors and environment can also influence each other. And this was one of the ideas from Albert Bandura. So sometimes we want to look and to see, okay, well, what is the social cognitive? Well, we have to remember that social cognition is the thinking about the perceptions, thoughts, emotions, motives, and behaviors of the self, other people, groups, and social systems. Sometimes we may relate to this as the theory of mind, as the social cognitive. Researchers actually have done some nice work, and we're actually going to take a look at an example where some researchers used false belief and the testing for false beliefs to really assess children's development on their theory of mind. So let's take a look at an example. So Sally places her marble in the basket in the top diagram. After Sally places her marble in the basket, she goes ahead and she leaves the room. Now another child enters the room. And the new child is Anne. She's going to take the marble out of the basket and then place it in her own box. Now the child that's being tested is the child that's being seated at the table. Now as Sally returns, the child that's being tested is going to be asked the question, where should Sally look for her marble? And this is one of the ways that we can test the theory of mind. So in this false belief test, children are asked to go ahead and respond to the scenario where a girl named Sally puts her marble in her own basket and then leaves the room. While she is gone, Anne moves the marble out of the basket into her box. Sally returns to the room, and we would ask the students at this time, where will Sally look for her marble? Well, this is really testing what we call false belief. Sometimes we used to see that in peekaboo with babies, where if you cover up your face to a baby, you are really invisible. You literally left the room, because once you are behind that, they no longer know that you exist. So that we're kind of using that false belief in this case, taken to another step where we're actually going to say, okay, now we know that something's there, or it's supposed to be there, and that's our false belief that it's going to be there. So one response is that the marble is actually in the basket where they initially had left it. The other response that we could get is that the marble is in the box. So this false belief test involves Sally and Anne. The child who developed the theory of mind should say that Sally will look in the basket based on her false belief that the marble is actually there. The child who fails this false belief test will say that Sally will look in the box, because that's where the child knows the marble has been moved. So once again, the children who pass this false belief test show evidence of having a theory of mind to explain human behavior, and they will say that Sally will look for a marble in the basket rather than the box. And the children who have the theory of mind will believe that Sally's behavior will be guided by the false belief about that marble's location. So they're able to set aside their own knowledge of where the marble ended up and after Anne moved it. So if they respond the marble's in the basket, they would pass that. And if they responded the marble's in the box, they would fail this testing of false belief. So thinking about beliefs, we kind of take a look inward a little bit when we talk about self-concept. And self-concept, really we have to think, well, what is it? Well, this is kind of the image that we have of ourselves. And some images that we have of ourselves can be positive. Some images that we have of ourselves are negative. So if I have a positive self-image, I may have a high self-concept. If I have a negative self-image, I may have a low self-concept. So how do we actually integrate self-concept into our classrooms? Because self-concept does have a drastic effect on our students and their performance. For a student who has low self-concept or low self-esteem, they have a reduced desire to learn. They may seem not able to focus. They may not be ready for class, unprepared, because they do not care about really getting a good grade, because they don't have that desire to learn, because they have that low self-concept. And even more so, some of them will even have little to no willingness to take a risk, to try and get an answer wrong. This is extremely important when we talk about our math classes, because students are required to persevere in mathematics. The other end of the spectrum is a student that may have a high self-concept. And if you have a high self-concept, these are really going to end up being the building blocks of the success for the student. They'll provide a firm foundation for their learning from year to year and throughout high school and middle school and all the other grade school levels. And at this level, if you have a high self-concept, these students will have an increased desire to learn. And they will have an increased level of perseverance in class. And they will take the risk and try harder problems and try challenge problems and bonus problems if you have them. So we can see that the polar opposites of the spectrum of a low self-concept student and a high self-concept student. So what can we do as teachers to really improve the success by using self-concept? Well, first off, we should take a second and genuinely praise our students. Because students are experts in distinguishing the genuine feedback from empty compliments. They learn to dismiss vague words of praise as insincere, and sometimes they even consider them as phony. Comments that suggest thoughtful appreciation of their work, on the other hand, are actually meaningful to them. Toward that end, let the student know in specific terms what you liked about his or her work and behavior. If they're progressing slowly, praise them for the small steps they took forward. If you sense that they're uncomfortable being praised in front of their classmates, tell them in private or even in a note. We can also, as teachers, show evidence of the progress of the students. We can showcase accomplishments. So you might read one of the students' accomplishments to the class, maybe display their artwork on a bulletin board, or even let them demonstrate how to do a math problem. You can also even go back and inform their parents. Teachers are quick to let the parents know when the child is causing a problem or is a problem, but a lot of times parents aren't as eager or as diligent about notifying parents. Teachers aren't as diligent about notifying parents when the child is actually successful. So consider sending a note home to the parents, or maybe even give a parent a call or send them an email. We also want to help our students feel important in class. So we want to encourage them with a sense of belonging. Students with low self-esteem are often isolated from their classmates. You can promote a student's peer involvement with others by finding ways to integrate them into activities that take both place in and out of school. You might organize a group activity that includes the student, or maybe ask a couple of friendly students who are accepting to maybe spend time with the low self-esteem student during recess or lunch. If students pair up for class activities, assign the student a kind of easygoing partner so that way they can bond and really bring out some of the better qualities of that low self-esteem student. You might also want to encourage that the students maybe contact the student's parents and arrange social contacts with classmates outside of school. We can also help students deal with adversity. Now, if a student encounters academic difficulties, which often happens with students with low self-concept, help them appreciate that failure is a normal part of learning and that everyone experiences disappointment or frustration at some point. You may even tell the student that Lincoln lost 7 elections before ever becoming elected the President of the United States, or that Babe Ruth struck out 1,330 times during his career. Acknowledge that the student's frustration and then move on to help them with strategies of improvement. Express with your confidence that with hard work and your support that the student will likely succeed. Because overall, that is our goal as teachers, to really have our students succeed. And a great way of doing this is identifying a student's self-concept and really remediating where necessary. So thinking about self-concept, you're thinking about some things that are internally. Well, let's think about taking that from thinking about, okay, well, what's right and what's wrong? What are we supposed to be doing? What should a student be doing? Where should their head be when they come into class? So if I'm thinking about what is morality, I'm thinking, well, it's actually defined as a particular system of values and principles of conduct, especially one held by a specific person or society. When I think about morality, and when students think about morality, we often think about what is right versus what is wrong. And we always want to address this and get our students on the right track of morality. But morality can be broken down into three basic components. And there's different ways we can demonstrate or support morality. One way is the first component is the component of being effective. The effective component is also called the emotional component, which consists of feelings of guilt, concern for others, and feelings like that, and so on. Now, these are often associated with what is right and what is wrong. And we can associate these feelings that motivate our moral thoughts and actions. The second component of morality is our cognitive component. Now, this component centers on how we actually conceptualize what's right and what's wrong. How do we make our decisions? How do we know how to behave? So it goes back to the definition of what is considered right, what is considered wrong, and how do we conceptualize that? And third, we have our behavioral component. Now, this reflects on our students on how we behave, when do we behave. And so let's say, for example, we experience sometimes, or our students do, some temptation to cheat. And we have to really address that and say, okay, what's the morality of this? And at the higher levels, or the certain components of morality will determine our students with kind of what way they should think. Is this right? Is this wrong? And there's a behavioral component of that as well. So a child's development of morality has actually been discussed by several different psychologists. But first, I'd like to take a look at Jean Piaget. Jean Piaget had an idea about the development of morality in children. He was a Swiss psychologist and philosopher who placed great importance on the education of children. His focus was children. So in 1920s, he developed his theory of child development. This theory was in this theory, he actually linked cognitive development to moral development. He kind of linked those two together and saw that by using his storytelling techniques to analyze moral dilemmas with children, he actually gained a lot of insight on where the students or where the children stood as a level of moral development or cognitive development by using these storytelling techniques. Now, from Jean Piaget, there were some advancements in this. So his ideas weren't really prominent until later on when Lawrence Kohlberg took over some of his ideas and really expanded upon them. So in 1958, Lawrence Kohlberg came up with his theory of moral development. Lawrence Kohlberg was an American psychologist, and he was best known for his theory of stages of moral development. Throughout his years, he served as a professor of psychology at the University of Chicago, and then at graduate school at Harvard. And his theory was overall inspired by the work of Jean Piaget and his fascination with children's reactions to moral dilemmas. So his theory was very similar to Piaget's theory, but then he expanded on it just a little bit more. He also used storytelling techniques. And what I want to do right now is take a look at one of the storytelling, one of the stories that was told by Kohlberg, and it's one of these techniques and really identifying children's reactions to moral dilemmas. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up one of his most popular ones, is his famous Heinz story. And you can get this on YouTube. I'm just going to go ahead and attach this in here for you as well. But if you want to, there's the website. It's not mine, I didn't make it, but I'm going to go ahead and just add that snippet right in here.
Heinz's dilemma. Heinz's wife is dying because of a special kind of cancer. There's only one drug that the doctors think might save her. It is a new formula which a pharmaceutical company in the same town has recently discovered. The drug is very expensive to produce, but the company is charging 10 times the production cost. Heinz goes to everyone he knows to borrow money, but he can only collect half of what the drug costs. He tells the CEO of the company that his wife is dying and asks him to sell it for less so if he could pay at a later time. But the CEO refuses. He can make no exceptions. The research had been very expensive and the company needs to turn in a profit. What should happen next?
Okay, and I hope you enjoyed that video. I thought it's very creative on how to really get our children to think a little bit more on the morality of certain things. But there are a couple of different responses that were there. There were 3 different responses. So before I go into really what those responses and what they mean, first let's take a look at Kohlberg's theory. And let's take a look at all the different steps and all the different levels. So on the first level is what's called our pre-conventional morality. Now typically you see this in preschool, elementary schools, and even some junior high schools. But once they get to high school, this should not still be the case. But the pre-conventional morality of this is students look at if something's morally right by on the basis of if something is right or wrong based upon the idea of is there punishment involved. People make decisions based upon what is best for themselves without a regard for others' needs or feelings. They only obey the rules if they are established by a more powerful individual. And that's where it comes into the punishment standpoint. And then instrumental hedonism. Okay? So these are the 2 really first stages. And then stage 2, it's kind of like you're exchanging favors. People recognize you, or recognize that others also have needs. So they're kind of getting out of that stage 1. So they recognize others have needs. They may try to satisfy others' needs if their own needs are met too. Kind of like if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And that's kind of like the lowest level of morality here. After the pre-conventional, we're moving on to conventional morality. In conventional morality, you typically see this in older elementary schools, junior high schools. Mainly you see this in high schools. And this is kind of like the good girl, good boy morality. Everyone wants to make their decision based upon what actions will please others, especially authority figures. So teachers, you're involved in this, popular peers, things like that. They're concerned about maintaining relationships through sharing and trust and loyalty, and they take other people's perspectives and intentions into account when making decisions. And the 4th stage, which is also part of our level 2s, is the idea of authority and social order maintaining morality. Okay, so if we look at this, and this is kind of like our law and order, people look to society as a whole for guidelines about right and wrong. They know rules are necessary for keeping society running smoothly and believe it's their duty to obey them. However, they perceive rules to be inflexible and they don't necessarily recognize that as society's needs change. So rules should change as well. So they don't necessarily notice that quite yet. And the third and the highest level would be the post-conventional morality. Here, this is rarely seen before college, but it is a social contract. People typically recognize the rules that represent agreements among many individuals about appropriate behavior. So they really view, people also recognize the flexibility of rules. So not only do you see that there's rules, but they say, okay, well, this rule applies sometimes, but not other times. Sometimes we want to bend the rules a little bit. And so that is the morality of contract, individual rights, and democratically accepted law. So that's kind of like really thinking about, is this something we really want to accept? And last but not least, the stage 6, this is the universal ethical principle. This is when you think about individual principles of conscience. So we say like the hypotheticals, the ideal stage of that few people ever reach. People in this stage adhere to a few abstract universal principles such as the equality of all people, respect for human dignity, and commitment to justice. So keeping in mind these stages and these levels, let's think about Heinz' story. So in option 1, we had Heinz should not steal the drug because it's breaking the law. We had another option, Heinz should steal the drug and accept going to jail. And option 3, Heinz should steal the drug and not go to jail because it's not fair. So if we take a look at our first option, this option is our pre-conventional stage of moral development. These are our level 1, or our first level of moral development, and this is typically seen in preschool, elementary schools, and some junior high schools. Option 2 is the conventional stage of moral development. So if they steal the drug and they accept going to jail, which means not only are they thinking about others, but they're not quite thinking beyond those authority figures quite yet. So because of that, they're still in the second level of the conventional stage of moral development. And last but not least, the post-conventional stage of moral development happens when they think, when the child thinks that Heinz should steal the drug and they should not go to jail because it's not going to be fair. And this is using the ideal. So the ideal is that, the equality of all people, respect to human dignity, and commitment to justice. And so here they're thinking, okay, the ideal situation is that they would be able to get the drug to save the life and that no one has to go to jail so they can live happily ever after. All right, so I hope you enjoyed what we had to talk about today. Once again, think about some of those discussions, and if you have any questions, feel free to post and reply on that. I look forward to watching some of your videos.